Hi, I'm Ludic Ryan. Today I'd like to talk about interesting movement patterns in Flinthook. The grappling hook in the game is interesting because not only does it afford the possibility of sustaining your position on the y-axis as in Flappy Bird and Copter, but this is being performed alongside the regular play tasks inherent in this genre, and so it changes the patterns of movement typically found in these games. The y-axis refers to the verticality of a game environment. Within both 2D and 3D examples, it regards the height of the player character respective to the environment. A player character's position on the y-axis is usually determined by naturally sloped game environments or some mechanics which aid traversal like jumping or climbing. The grappling hook in Flinthook changes the patterns of movement in relation to gravity, contextual elements commonly found in other X-Y axis games, and it is interesting when contrasted with the movement patterns of top-down X-Z axis games. Categorizing Flinthook within one genre or subgenre is difficult since there are a multiplicity of 2D games which share a number of mechanics in terms of combat, ludic frames in terms of their roguelike or Metroidvania status, and aesthetic style in terms of their pixel art representation. It is in no way a bad thing that these independent titles share some of these aspects since they all take these elements in different directions. Genre categorization in games comes about through identifying the core game loop, whether it's racing game, platforming game, or a survival game. However, in some subgenres, it can become more descriptive of the experience, like bullet hell games, or descriptive of the games which popularize the experience, as with roguelikes and Metroidvania. Though these latter two subgenres can result in different experiences, certain mechanics like procedural generation of environments, permadeath, and difficult combat can transfer across. Flinthook in particular blends certain elements of Metroidvania and roguelikes. Where each level is procedurally generated, it requires the careful exploration and completion of level segments, and there exists an element of permadeath similar to Rogue Legacy, where the player will accrue experience points and levels upon each death. It is important to show the genre context in which Flinthook is situated, because these subgenres have many performative requirements which might enter into the player's tactical thought processes. Before we talk about y-axis movement in Flinthook, let's first establish the regular vertical movement to be found in this subgenre of 2D games. Gravity is the key factor which determines movement patterns. The player character is tethered to the ground until the jump mechanic is activated. There is an inevitability which governs the usage of the jump mechanic that we can see best in the runner subgenre of games like Bit Trip Runner, where the player must anticipate the approach, the trajectory, and the landing when jumping. Knowing the precise acceleration and trajectory of the jump mechanic is what games like M++ and Super Meat Boy rely upon. The game's system simulation of gravity frames movement on the y-axis. However, y-axis movement can be supplemented with other affordances like double jumps, wall jumps, or environmental objects which can alter a player character's trajectory. There's an inherent constraint then on y-axis movement in comparison to x-axis movement, where the player character can freely wander horizontally without fear of being tethered back to the ground or falling into a pit. This brings us to games like Flinthook, which have a movement mechanic which affords sustained movement opportunities on the y-axis, which is affected but is crucially not limited by gravity. We can understand how this grappling hook works by examining the y-axis movement in games like Copter and Flappy Bird. The player can only affect movement on the y-axis and must to continue their existence in the game. In both of these one-button games, the player must press or hold the button to ascend, and let go to let gravity take its course. The player is not bound by the inevitability of gravity, however, as they can sustain their y-axis position by feathering the movement button. The grappling hook mechanic affords the same sustained movement on the y-axis as Copter and Flappy Bird, because it doesn't require the player to be on a horizontal platform before activating it. The effect that these patterns of movement can have on this genre of games range from a greater variety in level design, which is vertically open, to giving the player more expressive options in how they play this genre of games. The player can still hop from platform to platform and use wall jumps to reach higher areas. However, the grappling hook opens up another set of movement tools. The player character can move faster on the y-axis using it. It creates a slingshot effect which can launch the player character away from danger or, when feathered, maintain their y-axis position for advantageous damage dealing. As we can see in other X-Y axis games, they are reliant on platforms for most of the y-axis movement. This clutters the y-axis space because they must always provide a platform to jump from instead of having freedom to move around that space. Wall jumps afford another performative skill set to the player, but are reliant on a stretch of wall that takes up the space. These games are no less for not having sustained Y-axis movement, but by comparing them it shows what Flinthook brings to the genre. The acceleration difference between jumping on platforms and using gravity to descend should not be discounted. Games on the X and Z axis don't have that since they are from a top-down perspective. That rapid acceleration must come from other abilities like dodge or dash movements. Whilst XZ axis games have consistent movement across the horizontal and vertical planes because of the lack of gravity, when compared with Flinthook we can identify that extra layer of expression in being able to sustain the Y-axis position irrespective of any jumping platforms around, and the ability to slingshot around the level with speed. Flinthook adds another performative level to the XY axis 2D game by allowing two sets of movement speed, whether it's ascending platforms and using gravity a la Rogue Legacy, or slingshotting your way around the level. It plays off its surrounding elements like enemies and level design to force the player into thinking creatively about how they overcome its procedural challenges. Because it is situated in a subgenre which can require a lot of performative skill from the player, the addition of a new kind of movement set keeps the genre fresh. Like Hollow Knight, Axiom Verge and Enter the Gungeon, Flinthook uses its core mechanic to show how Metroidvania and roguelike games can still evolve. Thank you so much for watching. If you'd like to watch last week's video on identity dissonance in Cibele, then click on the link in the video. Next week I'll be talking about the special evolution of the audio diary in Tacoma, so if you'd like to be notified when this video is released, then click on the subscribe button below.